And families. My name is Kevin Lamb, and I'm Associate Dean of Admission and Financial Aid and the Director of Financial Aid here at Center College, and joined by Chad Spencer, who is our Vice President of Enrollment Management.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us tonight for this program. We appreciate that you're taking the time out of your evening to spend with us talking about a topic that we believe has a high level of interest and one that's important as people think about navigating the financial aid process from start to finish. Tonight, I anticipate us spending about an hour or so together covering financial aid basics, but I can assure you we will move well beyond the basics this evening. And understanding that our audience consists of both people who currently have students enrolled in college and those who have prospective college students, we plan to come at this in such a way to where the information you take with you tonight will be applicable regardless of your circumstances and your individual situation. Also, appreciating that there may be some joining us tonight whose students are considering colleges other than Center College, although I question why that would be the case. We will also come at this in a way to where you can take what you learn and apply it, even if your student chooses to pursue institutions other than Center. A couple of other goals that I have is that you'll feel more knowledgeable about this process as we finish tonight's program around 8 o'clock, and that you'll feel a little less anxious about the idea of navigating the financial aid application process if this is indeed the first time that you've launched into this process. So with that, we're going to get started and start moving through tonight's program. At the conclusion of the program, we will have a question and answer session. So I encourage you to drop your questions into the chat, because at the end of our time, Krista will then work us through those questions so that we don't leave anyone at the conclusion of tonight's program with unanswered questions. So please don't be shy about dropping your questions into the chat. We also, on the slides, will ask questions on each of them and then set out to answer those questions. So you may find that some of the things you're coming into tonight's program most curious about, we will cover as we move through the contents. So Kevin, if you'll advance us to the next slide, I'll get us started. What will we cover in tonight's program? Well, we're going to start with talking about applying for financial aid in detail. I can tell you, as someone who's worked in admission and financial aid for more than 25 years now, if you don't apply for financial aid, you're extremely unlikely to receive it. So we'll start there and then build. We're also going to talk about cost of education and break it down so that everyone can understand all the components of that sticker price that colleges often promote and broadcast and advertise. We'll focus on need-based financial aid in a way that we hope will demystify this process a bit so you can understand what happens with the financial data that's submitted within the FAFSA form, and in some cases a CSS profile form. So in the financial aid applications, so you can understand the analysis that takes place as colleges and universities work to determine a student and a family's eligibility for need-based financial aid. Then we'll shift gears and talk about merit-based scholarships. I believe that merit-based scholarships can be an effective way to help pay for college, and it's important that students understand how they can position themselves as competitive candidates for merit-based scholarships at those colleges and universities who offer merit-based awards. We'll compare sample financial aid packages side by side for 3 different institutions, Center being one of them. We'll talk about some federal changes that have taken effect this year, and then we'll close with a handful of consumer tips. How do students apply for financial aid? I'd first like to draw your attention to the left-hand side of the screen where you see that families must reapply annually. So for those of you out there who will be applying for financial aid for the first time, please be aware that each year you will reapply for financial aid. So it's not a 1 year application process, and indeed is an annual one over the course of your students' 4 years in their undergraduate program. Many of you have likely heard of the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid. Of course, last year it was in the news because of the delays associated with the release of the FAFSA and then some of the bumps along the way once it was released. This year, the FAFSA is expected to go fully live by December 1st. I do encourage you to visit studentaid.gov and establish a user account for yourself and for your students and begin the process of completing the FAFSA now. We just learned on Friday that the FAFSA is launching earlier than the December 1 go live dates. And as of today, we were notified that it is available for families to begin the process of completing it now. So if you'd like to get a bit of a head start ahead of that December 1 date, you can begin the process now. It is indeed free, so you will not pay to access it, to complete it, or to submit it. It is online at studentaid.gov, and you will be completing it using 2023 income and asset information. One of the beautiful things about the FAFSA is that you may link your IRS tax record to your FAFSA record, which allows for the automated flow of data directly from the IRS database into the income section of the FAFSA, thereby eliminating any possibility of error within that income section. So there will come a point while you're completing the FAFSA at which you will link your IRS record to your FAFSA record. Now, the asset section is a little different in that you will be keying in your own data using your own account information. So when you reach that point of completing the asset section, parents, you will be keying in that information. There's also a student section that will require responses as well related to assets. And if your student has filed a tax return for 2023, then they too will have the ability to link their IRS record to that FAFSA record. I'm often asked the question by families, who submits their data along with the student in cases where biological or adoptive parents are not married or living together? In cases where parents are separated, then the person who provides the greatest level of financial support to the student will be the responsible party in completing the FAFSA along with the student. And if that parent is remarried, then that step parent will also be submitting their data within the FAFSA document. Now, the CSS profile is another financial aid application that, unlike the FAFSA, is not required by nearly all colleges in the country. It instead is required by some. And by some, I mean roughly 300 or so. They tend to be private colleges. They tend to be those that are of the more selective variety. And they also tend to be those places that utilize their own resources in meeting the majority of the financial need for the students who are receiving financial aid on their campuses. If you'd like to review a full comprehensive listing of all of the colleges and universities that require the CSS profile, please visit collegeboard.org, and you can find that full listing of the colleges who require it. For those of you who have students who are applying to college this fall, it may be a good use of your time and a nice homework assignment to visit collegeboard.org and look for the colleges where your student is applying for admission to understand whether or not the CSS profile is a requirement for those institutions. In cases where the CSS profile is required, it will be completed in addition to the FAFSA. So it's not an either or proposition, it will be both. The FAFSA is used for the most part to determine eligibility for federal and sometimes state funding, whereas the CSS profile is most often used to determine eligibility for institutional financial aid support. And then finally, some colleges may, at their discretion, require students and families to submit copies of tax returns and W-2 forms and other tax documents. More often than not, this requirement is fulfilled by uploading those documents. And lastly, institutional aid forms may be required by some institutions as well. Using Center as an example, the Center aid form is a requirement for our returning students to submit some additional information in addition to the FAFSA form. So once all that has taken place, the applications have been submitted, the financial documents have been uploaded if required. How is need-based financial aid eligibility actually determined? You see on this slide a simple equation, straightforward, beginning with the cost of education. Subtracted from that total cost of education is any expected financial assistance from outside resources. I tend to think about outside scholarships that students may be eligible for, that they may be bringing with them to help cover a portion of the cost of attendance. That is subtracted from cost of education. We then subtract the student aid index, which is essentially the expected family contribution that's derived from all of the financial data submitted within the FAFSA and or the CSS profile. And the result is the student's financial need. And again, this is the student's financial need for 1 year, because this is a process by which students must reapply annually. Now we're going to take this equation and break it down by each of its individual components. And Kevin, if you'll advance us, we'll look at the slide concerning the cost of education. What is included in the total cost, in the sticker price, if you will? And you can see we've broken out the costs into direct expenses and indirect expenses. Tuition and fees are going to be charged by the college or university the student attends. Therefore, they're direct expenses. They're billable. The same is true for food and housing if the student is living on campus and has purchased a meal plan. So most students who live on campus are going to have both of those housing costs associated with their attendance plus the cost of food based upon the meal plan choice they have made. So again, billable expenses, therefore direct. Indirect expenses will include things like the books and supplies that students purchase in order to support their studies in college. Transportation expenses will often be provided for within the total cost of education as an allowance. So depending upon how far the student must travel in order to reach their college campus, their transportation costs will vary. The student has to board an airplane every time they move to and from their college campus is likely to have a higher transportation allowance built into their total cost of education than a student who will be making a short drive to and from their college campus. And lastly, miscellaneous personal expenses will also be included as an allowance within the total cost of education. And colleges will make determinations based upon the cost of living in the area where they are located and making a determination about the level of allowance included for miscellaneous personal expenses. Now, to quickly revisit food and housing being a direct expense, if your student chooses to live off campus, then that food and housing expense will shift from a direct cost of attendance to an indirect cost of attendance. No longer will the college or university be paid for your student's housing. Instead, you're going to be paying it to the landlord or the apartment complex where the student lives. And the same will be true if the student chooses not to purchase a meal plan. And if they're instead eating out at Cookout and Waffle House and all of the places that college students love to frequent, then of course food will continue to cost something, only it won't be a billable charge from the college or university. The next component of the equation was outside resources. And simply put, outside resources are funds coming from sources other than the college or university. And we provide just a short list of the sources from which these funds may come. I tend to think first about employers of parents. Sometimes they may support a scholarship program for dependents of employees. I know my own father's employer did back in the 90s. He worked for Sea Ray Boats in Florida. And I remember writing an essay. I don't remember what the topic was, but writing an essay to apply for a scholarship that supported the dependents of Sea Ray employees. What I remember most about the scholarship program was that I was not chosen as a recipient of the scholarship. Someone else won it, right? And $250 then went to that student to help support their college attendance. My best advice when it comes to outside scholarships is always start the search locally where the student has attended school, where parents work, where the student has been involved in youth sports or community theater and other civic organizations. The student is likely to be eligible and competitive for outside scholarships that are sourced close to home, where they've been involved and where they're likely to be eligible for those scholarship programs. Now, outside resources can be beneficial in a number of ways. For one, they can help to replace self-help, and self-help within a financial aid awards package is simply aid that must be either repaid or must be earned, so loans and or work study. In cases where colleges are providing financial aid, but the financial aid does not meet 100% of the student's calculated need, then there is a gap in the financial aid award. And in those cases, then the gap may be filled to some degree by the outside resource that the student is receiving. And if the student's receiving a merit-based scholarship and the merit-based scholarship is for some amount less than the total cost of attendance, then oftentimes that outside resource may be stacked on top of the merit-based scholarship and thus help further reduce the cost for that student to attend that college or university. And colleges all have their own policies as it relates to treatment of outside resources. So it is important to, again, do your homework and understand treatment at the places where your student is either already enrolled or planning to enroll so that you can understand whether or not that college university might reduce your family contribution based upon that outside resource having been received by the student. Kevin, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Chad. And so Chad has covered what the cost of education is and what outside resources are. Now we're going to turn to what the student aid index is, which is a very nebulous and sort of daunting sounding task, but literally what it is, it's the index figure that comes from all of the data that is submitted in the FAFSA to determine a student's aid eligibility. And so in the FAFSA world, it's called the student aid index. In the profile world, it is still called expected family contribution or estimated family contribution. And this represents a family's calculated ability to contribute towards the cost of education. It does take into account factors such as income, assets, and household size. And again, it's annually determined, so change from year to year can be considered. So how does all this come together and what does a calculated contribution mean? Well, it's really trying to level the playing field and looking at the whole diversity of financial situations families might have to come up with what is a reasonable expectation based on the fact that you're sending a child to college, that financing a college education for your child is going to be a top priority. So the figure is oftentimes a little bit different than what families might hope or expect it to be, but it's really trying to do the best to help distribute what in the end are very generous resources, but still somewhat somewhat limited. And that's on the federal level, state level, and institutional level. But it's one figure that will allow us to determine eligibility for all those levels of aid. So there are different components of the student aid index. As I mentioned, it does look at both income and assets, but that is both on the parent side as well as the student side. And now one of the fears that I often hear is, oh, well, if we have assets, a college or university is going to expect us to use all of our assets to contribute to students' education. And that's not the case. And we don't look at all the income either. Actually, there's a whole need analysis formula that takes quite a while to work through if you do it by hand. To teach people how to do that with the federal formula takes 1.5 hours to 2 hours, and it takes about the same on the institutional methodology side with the profile. That's because there are a lot of allowances here that saying, okay, well, basic living expenses need to be covered first. And after that, then there's allowances for taxes on the income side as well. Not all the assets are going to be assessed to be a contribution in 1 year because those assets need to go for a lot of different areas. So there are a lot of allowances again that are used against both income and assets and what that looks like. As an example, parent assets have to get stretched a whole lot further for a far greater array of things than student assets. And so parent assets are protected to a much greater level than what student assets will. One thing that formulas do is they never assume that those are going to go all the way to zero. So it's always a proportion of what's reported, never the whole amount. So one of the popular assets that will allow families to save for college is a 529 plan or other college savings plans. We'll get a lot of questions about this because there is a twist on this one. Generally, assets are reported on financial aid forms for whoever owns those assets. But 529 plans are an exception. When the owner is a dependent student, they're actually reported on the side of a parent because this is an acknowledgement that those can be very sizable assets, but the student didn't earn all that income and create that asset on their own. So though it's for the benefit of the student, it is really a parent asset. Now, sometimes with 529 plans, it could be another family member or somebody else who is not the parent or the student that is the owner of that. In that case, the principal in the 529 plan is not reported on the FAFSA. Only the annual distributions come into the next year's FAFSA as other money received. And that is counted as untaxed income on the form there. So how is the student aid index calculated? All the parent information is looked at and assessed with those allowances that I was referring to, and that comes up with the parent contribution. And then the student income and asset information is looked at separately, and that comes up with a student contribution. Those two combine to create the student aid index. Again, this index is what is used in financial aid to determine eligibility for need-based aid programs. So what about merit scholarships? Merit scholarships are funds awarded based on factors other than financial need. Think of these as your talents, what you're bringing from your experience and accomplishments. They can be academic factors, they can be talent factors such as music, fine arts, visual arts, can be athletic talents at NAIA, Division II, and Division I institutions in the NCAA. Sometimes it's service. Other times it can be a geographical factor. There can be any number of different things, but it has to do with, again, criteria that aren't derived from need. So procedures for being considered for merit scholarships are going to vary. Sometimes scholarships use nomination processes and you can't be considered without nomination. Some have nomination processes where you can self-nominate or you can be nominated by a family member. Others will use separate scholarship applications. That might include essays. That might include an interview. Sometimes they'll include videos. There's additional information beyond what is in the admission application that can be asked. But oftentimes, just the straight information in the admission application is all that is needed for applying for merit scholarships. The important thing here is, again, to look at your list of schools that your student is interested in and find out what merit scholarships are available, what the processes are for applying for those, and most importantly, also the timeline. Timelines for merit scholarships often will coordinate with application deadlines, but not necessarily. And so sometimes you have a little more time to do that scholarship application because it's asking additional work of the student during their very busy senior year. But other times, to be considered for merit scholarships, and if it's just something that is based off the admission application, all merit scholar applicants might have to use a particular admission round. And so you want to do your research there. Colleges are good about making this information very broadly available on their websites. If you're having difficulty finding it on the website, contact the admission counselor that you're working with or the admission office, and they will, of course, be glad to share that information with you. So let's dig into merit scholarships a little bit further. Do all colleges offer merit-based scholarships? They don't. And actually, there's an inverse relationship to the schools or institutions' position in higher education in the marketplace and how many merit scholarships they offer. Think of the Ivy Leagues, the most selective schools in the nation. There are others amongst their ranks as well that are equally as selective, but they offer very few to no merit scholarships. Other institutions that might be rolling admission institutions may offer merit scholarships to the majority or all of their students. So it really, the availability of merit-based scholarships is determined by their position in the higher education marketplace. The way you figure that out is really selectivity level. So looking at how selective they are, but most colleges in this day and age, if they do offer merit scholarships, will also say what proportion of their incoming class would typically receive merit scholarships. What we really have to look at there is the merit scholarships are allocating resources very broadly across an institution. Most of the time, merit scholarships have been driven by donors, and so the criteria for the scholarships are going to be set in stone with endowment agreements when the institution accepted the gifts. And there's a whole different range of philosophies for merit scholarships. Many recognize outstanding academic achievement. There are others that look well beyond academic achievement and think about the character or contributions students will make to the communities. And scholarships can be used to build academic communities. They can be used to build special interest communities. They often relate somehow either to the college's mission or to their aspirations as well. So there are a lot of different philosophies that will drive the creation of merit-based scholarships at different schools. So powerful scholarship candidates, they often present very well-crafted applications. What I like to think of this as is points of resonance. And so there's an interconnectedness to their application where themes build upon themselves. And it's not just about one's accomplishments and leadership ability roles, but it really gets into the character of the student, who they are and who they're becoming. And there's a lot of resonance or a theme that runs through their application. They, of course, will end up demonstrating genuine interest in the college that they're applying to for the merit scholarships. And it really gets down to a very genuine and authentic presentation of oneself in your application. Think of this as the student's voice really carries through the application and ties together all the information that is coming to an admission and scholarship committee through that application. One of the other things that is really true of the most successful merit scholarship applications are their marks of character, that they're resilient, that they've risen to the challenges, that they've sought out challenges, but not only that, they continue to challenge themselves through the finish line. Oftentimes, merit scholars on college campuses are the folks that are going to be the catalyst to various parts of those communities. And so scholarship recipients really need to embody not only all the traits, but also the habits of mind and character that help to drive those things forward. What are some of the key questions to ask about merit scholarships? Well, first is the scholarship renewable? Some scholarships are only available for 1 year. Most in this day and age are renewable for 4 years. If they are renewable scholarships, you want to know what those requirements are. Is it simply a GPA? Is it participation in, say, with music scholarships, particular ensembles, music lessons? Any number of different things can be attached to merit scholarships. If it's something that deals with a very specific academic interest, really look closely to see what those requirements might be. Because one of the things most students want is to have some flexibility in their college curriculum. And if you have a merit scholarship in a particular area, that may be the area that you want to spend a lot of time. Most often, that is true for merit scholars. But you need to look also at what options that leaves you in your curriculum beyond requirements for that scholarship as well as your major and for graduation. To have a talent scholarship at many institutions can mean two things. Oftentimes at large institutions, and this is a broad generalization, so it's not true of all, but you'll have to major in that particular interest or talent area, be it an academic department or a special interest like music. But at many other colleges, particularly liberal arts colleges, to be, say, a music scholar means that you're going to be significantly involved in the life of the music department, but not necessarily a music major. One of the other questions to look at with merit scholarships is whether or not the merit-based scholarship will affect any need-based aid eligibility. Most of the time, the answer to that question is it will. Merit scholarships are institutional resources by and large, and so that can be one of the institutional resources which is helping to meet an overall level of demonstrator or calculated need. Now, that doesn't mean that merit scholarships are the only thing with need-based aid. You can qualify for other need-based funds in addition to merit scholarships. There are cases, though, where a merit-based scholarship might exceed the need of a student, and so then there wouldn't be any additional need-based aid offer. Again, having conversations with the institutions that your child is interested in are important in this area. So what about athletic scholarships? Athletic scholarships are a unique beast. They are not administered by financial aid or admission offices. They're awarded by athletic departments. And that means that they can carry their own timelines and own requirements there. With athletic scholarships, there are both partial scholarships and full athletic scholarships that can be offered. And this will vary a lot based on the type of institution, be it an NCAA Division I institution, an NCAA Division II institution, or an NAI institution. It can also vary by sport. So not all sports at the Division I level are able to offer full athletic scholarships to their full team roster. It also gets down to the availability for athletic scholarships at a particular institution. Again, some schools offer athletic scholarships or offer high quality athletics that are very competitive, but no athletic scholarships. These are going to be your Division III institutions, such as Center.
Thank you, Kevin, for walking us through the calculation of need-based aid eligibility and non-need-based or merit and athletic scholarship eligibility. What are the typical components of a financial aid awards package? As you think about aid eligibility and resources, you think about what's free money or gift aid, which is what you most want, and what will be considered as self-help, that the loans, the work, resources that have to be repaid or earned with time. Now, when it comes to gift aid, that free money, it can be provided in the form of both scholarships, which tend to be those non-need-based awards, and or grants. But I encourage you to not get too caught up in the terms being used by colleges or universities, because oftentimes grant and scholarship can be used interchangeably. Both of them are ultimately free money. Whereas the self-help component will be student employment or work study or student loans. And we've included here the notation that student loans are available at some schools. That simply means that not all colleges and universities are going to participate in the federal loan programs. However, many, in fact, most do participate in the loan programs. Now, what we're going to do on the next slide is compare side by side 3 different institutional financial aid award packages. So these are sample aid awards, all of which are quite generous as well. My hope is that through this exercise, you'll feel prepared to decipher financial aid awards when the time comes that you begin receiving them, or in cases of families where your students are already enrolled here, then you'll understand how to work towards a bottom line understanding of the total cost of attendance for the student. I don't know what type of consumer you all may be, but for me, it ultimately boils down to what's the bottom line. I want to understand what kind of commitment I will be making financially as I think about any purchase, not just college, but any purchase. We're going to focus most of our energies in the middle section of this slide here, where we're going to cover the components of the financial aid awards. But to begin, we have to start at the top line where we have the total cost of attendance, which we see to be variable here. We have center's cost of attendance at $66,760. We have a public university option that's more modestly priced, if I dare say that, at $30,000 a year. And then lastly, an $82,000 annual cost at one of the more highly priced institutions here in the country. Now, the one constant on this slide is the student aid index. And what we're assuming here is that all of the institutions collected the same data, they applied the same formula, therefore calculating the same result. $25,000 annual contribution in the case of this student and this family. That means then variable need-based need eligibility or calculated financial need. At $41,760 in need, this is a relatively high need case at center, not extreme, not eligible for federal funding, but over $40,000 in financial need means this family is going to need a high level of support in order to make center accessible and affordable. A financial aid award package at Centre College will oftentimes include a merit-based scholarship. So for students who have achieved at a high level academically and who have been committed, contributing community members, people who are making a positive difference in their high school communities, we then often offer merit-based scholarship opportunities. And $25,000 is among the higher levels of general merit scholarship eligibility here at Centre. We combine merit-based scholarship eligibility with need-based grant eligibility, in this case, $9,260. We also offer students the opportunity to borrow through the federal Stafford Loan Program. For first-year students, the maximum borrowing eligibility is $5,500. For sophomores, it will increase to $6,500, and for juniors and seniors, there's $7,500 in eligibility through the Stafford Loan Program. We oftentimes also provide students an opportunity to work on campus and earn over the course of the academic year. And in this case, there's a $2,000 work study award, which equates to approximately 8 hours of work per week to earn that $2,000 across the course of the academic year. Total aid being offered through the combination of aid components is $41,760, which is equal to calculated financial need in this case, meaning the family will pay the $25,000 SAI or family contribution, and the student will repay the loan and the interest later. And by later, I mean beginning 6 months after graduation from college. If we shift over to the public university, we see that there's just $5,000 in financial need in this case, meaning this is not at all a high need case. In fact, it is a very low need case. And in terms of the financial aid awards package, we see the one and only component as a part of this financial aid award is the student loan. And it's a student loan at $5,000, so slightly less than the student's Stafford loan eligibility as a first-year student. This family will pay the $25,000 student aid index, and the student will begin repayment of the loan and the interest 6 months after graduating from the public university. And finally, the highest priced institution, the other private university in this example, at an $82,000 cost of attendance, happens to be a place that has no merit-based scholarship awards, but it does pledge to meet 100% of calculated need for its students, and it does so without offering student loans. There's approximately 24 colleges and universities in the country who offer aid according to a model like this one. Again, full need met, no loans as a part of the financial aid package. So we see a combination of grant aid at $54,000 and student work study at $3,000, equaling $57,000 in total aid offered to the student, meaning this family will be required to pay the $25,000 student aid index in order for that student to attend this private university. My hope is that this is helpful in allowing you to understand that colleges will all be working according to their available resources, trying to make its education accessible by making it affordable to as many students as possible. And they will use a variety of components in working to make the education affordable for those students to whom they've offered admission or whom they've already enrolled to their college communities. Once the bottom line has been determined, then what are some payment options for families? Oftentimes, colleges will offer monthly payment plans where families can make installments over the course of 8 or 10 months during the academic year. We've talked about the federal student loan option for students, the Direct Stafford Loan Program. Parents, if you complete a FAFSA, you may be eligible to borrow through the Federal Direct Plus Loan Program if you so wish. So you may pursue that program and potentially be eligible for the total cost of attendance minus other financial aid for which the student is eligible. And lastly, private educational loans may be available to the student. You may choose to pursue these through alternative lenders. I will caution you that oftentimes the terms of these loans may not be quite as attractive as the federal loan programs. So, of course, as is true in any case where you are borrowing, please work to understand the terms of the loan before agreeing to borrow through that funding source.
So one of the things that will happen is that with the financial aid forms, they're looking at income information that's 2 years old. And so your financial circumstances might change between the data that you're required to report on the forms and where your current reality is. So what happens if your circumstances have changed? There's a broad concept of special circumstances that institutions can take into consideration that would cover these sorts of situations. Now, institutions may choose to apply professional judgment to those special circumstances, and they may choose to do that at different times throughout the year or wait until the next annual filing. Not all institutions will make the same considerations or do it in the same way. So this is one of the ways that I like to talk about it with the need analysis is there are a lot of components that are going into need analysis. And really, if this is dealing around the income area, then there are ways in which if assumptions that are built into the formulas behind those income figures end up being broken for your financial circumstances, there's a way that we may choose to consider those. And so a change of income is the most easy and common way to understand this. Now, the special circumstances may end up affecting the family contribution, but sometimes they don't because the change isn't large enough. What's important here is for you to, as a family, to communicate what those changes have been and be prepared to document the changes that you have there. Institutions will have different forms for collecting this information, and the burden of documentation will vary from institution to institution. But in the end, what we're doing to consider those special circumstances through the professional judgment is going in and altering data elements in the financial aid applications. And because there are federal and state funds available, as well as institutional funds, any derivation from the original application has to be well documented because it's something that auditors can look at. So know that there's a burden on the families for providing that documentation, but financial aid offices aren't asking for that information just to make your lives difficult. It's because they need to have tangential information or tangible information to be able to make those considerations. So the next area is FAFSA simplification. We heard a little bit about this last year in the news, And that carries forward to this year because we still have the new FAFSA in its second year. We're just going to run through a few of the big changes that were introduced with FAFSA simplification. So these changes that were introduced last year actually reduced the number of questions that are asked on a FAFSA from over 100 to approximately 40, hence the term FAFSA simplification. It is simpler to file the FAFSA because there are fewer questions being asked. The student aid index that we've spoken about tonight may sound new to some of your ears because it has replaced what used to be known as the expected family contribution, or EFC. Now, behind the scenes, one of the things that happened there is there was also change in the federal needs analysis formula known as the federal methodology. One of those is that the reporting parent is determined by the level of financial support. And this gets back to the comments that Chad mentioned earlier. When you have a student whose both biological parents don't live in the same household, or if parents are divorced or divorced and remarried, then it's whatever parent is providing that student the majority of their financial support that ends up being reported on the FAFSA. One of the nice things about it that helps to make it simpler and reduce a lot of those questions is that all income data for most families is automatically transferred from the IRS to the Department of Ed for the income sections on the FAFSA. And that is true for both parents and students if they were tax filers. Now, there are some situations where that data doesn't come over cleanly. And so there are some families that do still manually report their income information on the FAFSA. Additional changes include that there are new Pell eligibility criteria that were introduced last year. And what that really did was expanded eligibility for the Pell Grant program. The Pell Grant program is a federal grant program that helps on a federal level to guarantee access to post-secondary opportunities for all families if they have a significantly high amount of calculated or demonstrated need. One of the big factors here is that number of children are no longer considered in the SAI formula. So if you have multiple children in college, I encourage you strongly to reach out to both institutions, or if you have 3 students in college, all 3, and ask them if they will make special circumstance consideration for the number in college. This is one of those areas where whether or not an institution will do that is up to their discretion. And if they do it, the kind of information they will like might vary a lot. One of the things that is happening there is that this is new for the financial aid community. And so there are a number of different ways that you can consider cost in college, and there isn't a consensus for what the best way to do that in the financial aid community. And so there's a lot of variation around that right now. One of the other things that is no longer in the formula on the federal side is untaxed retirement contributions. And so if you are making elective contributions to 401ks or 403bs, that is no longer counted on the FAFSA. Child support ends up with tricky consideration because it's actually an income category, but it doesn't get reported cleanly in the IRS, so it can't come over as part of the IRS data exchange. Therefore, child support received is now treated as a parent asset for the parent who received that, not as income. One of the other changes is that anybody who makes less than $60,000 no longer has to report any assets on the FAFSA. Business firm value used to be limited to business and firms that had more than 100 employees. That is no longer the case with the simplified FAFSA, and now all business and firm value must be reported. Now, this is net worth of businesses and firms. So you want to work with accountants or know what that net worth is, not just the value, but also decreasing that by any debt or liabilities you have for that business or firm. One of the other things that happened, and this was a big driver for increasing that Pell eligibility, but everybody benefits from this, is that the income protection allowances were increased in the federal formula. Now, the income protection allowance is really a catch-all phrase for a lot of those basic allowances that go against income that I referenced earlier when talking about the SAI. So we're back to some additional consumer tips. As Chad referenced earlier, especially with merit scholarships and outside scholarships, the best thing to do is start local. One of your best resources for that is consulting your college counselor. They often know the civic organizations or employers in your hometown areas who offer these scholarships. If there's been a change of college counselors recently at your school, then one of the things to do is ask to see if there is a program from last year's honors and awards night from your high school. A lot of times, the outside scholarships are listed there that students had received. And so that can be a great way to track down contact information and leads for finding those local scholarships. You really want to avoid scholarship programs and search services that charge fees for helping you to find financial aid. Generally, they're going to make more money than you would receive in financial aid with that. So be really skeptical of those. Now, one exception is the CSS Profile is a private application that is run by and administered through the College Board. And so there is a fee for applying for the profile that is on the up and up. But anybody who has an income of $100,000 or less automatically receives a fee waiver for the CSS Profile. Another great tool that's out there in any college that does federal financial aid business, which is the vast majority. Actually, there are only a handful of colleges or universities in the nation which do not accept federal financial aid, are required to have net price calculators. This is a quick and easy way with some basic information, your taxes from 2 years ago, as well as a sense of your assets, and oftentimes your students' academic GPA, class rank, and things like that, that you can go in and very quickly get an estimate of what the cost might be and a broad estimate for a particular institution. Best idea there is if you're going to a college, you can hunt for those by going through menus, or really the easiest way to find these, because they can end up in about 4 to 6 places on college websites, is to just search for net price calculator on each individual site. And so negotiation and price matching always come up. And very few colleges will actually negotiate or price match. But, one of the axioms in financial aid, and we know that it's out there, is that you don't ask if there's anything more that can be considered for financial aid if you don't ask. But usually what that's going to relate to is if there's some information that the institution did not have. But again, you want to call and ask or initiate that conversation through email with an admission counselor or the financial aid office. Chad, would you like to offer any additional consumer tips?
I think it's always a wise idea, and you've already stressed this point, Kevin, particularly for those whose students are searching right now for their best match college. If finances are going to be a consideration, to take time to work with net price calculators on the college websites that the student is considering. They can be really helpful tools and give you an opportunity to project that net cost of your students' attendance. And I think above all else, have open communication with financial aid offices and ask questions as they arise. The financial aid process is not an easy one. And as someone who's worked through it twice with my own children, even working within this industry, there were questions for me that arose. So I strongly encourage you to ask questions as they arise. Don't feel badly about making contact with the financial aid offices. We're here to help. We want students to enroll and we want students to graduate. So I strongly encourage you to build relationships with the financial aid offices where your students are either enrolled already or exploring as possibilities. So thank you so much for your attention tonight, for taking the time with us. Krista, I'm going to hand it over to you so you can walk us through
I
any
have gotten
questions.
a few questions. So starting at the top of the list, I've got, do you report the equity in your primary residence as an asset on financial aid documents?
I love that question. I appreciate it. This is where there can be difference between the FAFSA and the CSS profile. So addressing the FAFSA approach first and its methodology? The answer is no. You will not report the value of home equity. The question's not asked. The only questions related to your primary residence on the FAFSA will be, what's your home address? However, if you own property outside of your primary residence, then you are to report the equity value as an asset on the FAFSA. The CSS profile, on the other hand, does ask about your primary residence. It will ask the current market value, the purchase price of the home, what you owe against it, your monthly mortgage payment, and also the year of purchase. Meaning some colleges will include a portion of your home equity as an available asset when determining eligibility for financial aid.
All right, the next question, is there any truth to the rumor that the NCAA is going to allow Division III schools to offer athletic scholarships?
I would say that's highly unlikely because that's what the basis of NCAA Division III is that there are no athletic scholarships or breaks in consideration for admission made in Division III. So I would find that to be a really difficult one to pass through the NCAA legislative process. If an institution wants to offer athletic scholarships, they're probably going to become a Division II institution if they're currently a Division III institution.
Okay. Moving on to the next question. If child support ends at 18, do you still report it as an asset or income going into the year? I'm assuming from this, maybe their kid turns 18 between high school and college, and so do you continue to count that child support if it's going to end?
And that's another great question, which I love. This is an excellent example of special circumstances, which applies to some families, but not all. And if that is happening for you, yes, reach out to every institution and ask them if they'll consider that, because the child support you would be reporting is from 2 years ago, well before the child turned 18. And so this is also a great example of special circumstance information that you would make in multiple years because of that lag and income information that's being reported on the financial aid forms.
Are work-study awards paid only as wages to the student? Okay, sorry, I started that. Let me start over. Are work-study awards only paid as wages for the student's work hours? There is no separate award amount applied against tuition or other charges? Question.
That is a great question, and that is true because students are working the hours. Fair Labor Standards Acts come into play, and for any hour an employee works, they need to be paid directly and compensated directly for that work. And so work study will always be paid directly to a student. Now, institutions will handle that differently, and some will allow you to then sign a portion or all of your wages over to your student account, but that takes a separate form and student permission to do that. Most schools do not do that, though, and if a student and family is wanting to use some of their work study or student employment earnings to contribute towards their cost of education, their direct cost, then you would simply receive that paycheck and then you turn around and make a payment on your student account at that college or university.
If you have a returning student, do you create a new FAFSA account, or will last year's be the one that is it still active?
Another excellent question. Those accounts are good for a student's entire career. And actually, if you're a parent and you have multiple children who will be going in college, your FSA user ID is your user ID for all of your children, but each child would have a unique FSA user ID. But those accountants and access codes and passwords that you set up are good for a student's entire academic career.
I feel a little vindicated, Kevin, because this is the question I asked you a week ago, because I'm going through this too. On the CSS forms and applications, do each parent need to fill out their own form, or do you fill it out under the student account? What if the parents don't live together?
Okay, two good questions there. So most students, or a lot of students, will have College Board accounts. because again, the College Board brings us the SAT and the AP. And so they also have a great college search engine out there, Bright Future. So a lot of students will have College Board accounts. You can use that student account to file the profile. But if you do that, then the student is able to see all of the income and asset information on that profile. So the College Board has a very helpful site that's out there that talks about parents creating what is a student password and login to go in and do that. Because you're now a new login, your child would not be able to see that income and asset information. The one trick there, though, is you're going in as a student to complete the profile, but it's going to ask questions about the student. You have a student login, but it's not your information. It's actually your child's information that you need to put into that. And there was a second part to that question, Krista, as well.
It was asking about
parents.
if the parents don't live together. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of what I
And
asked
so,
yesterday.
some colleges will ask for non-custodial parent information, and there are a variety of ways that that can happen. That can be through an institutional form with the CSS profile. That can actually be through a non-custodial profile. And so that will vary based on institutions. But generally, if there are two parents in the household, that's the information that's being looked at. And so with situations where a parent is divorced and then remarried, it's actually both the biological parent and the remarried parent's information that goes into the FAFSA. And then you need to look to see what the institutions want if it's a profile institution, whether they're looking for that student's household that they live in, or are they looking for both biological parents where it's going to be a custodial parent and a non-custodial parent FAFSA profile, sorry.
Okay, I only have one more question. It's also about the CSS profiles. Will each school have a separate CSS form, or is it a one-shop thing, kind of like the FAFSA?
It's a hybrid, actually. And so on the FAFSA, you can list up to 20 colleges now. That was one of the other changes with the new FAFSA, which makes it simpler again because you can use one FAFSA to get to more institutions. You simply list those individually. But with the FAFSA is the FAFSA. All institutions get the same information. Now, with the CSS profile, institutions do have the opportunity to ask their own institution-specific questions. And so it becomes really important with the profile is listing all the schools that are profile schools where you need to submit that up front. And then what happens in real time is you end up with a customized profile application that has all the basic questions, but then it layers in all the institutional questions that your particular collection of schools might want to ask. You won't necessarily know which college has asked which of those institutional questions, but just know some institution on your list of schools is going to want that information. So it's really sort of a hybrid there.
That is all that has been submitted to me. So last call to anybody still on here. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat real quick. I will, while we wait to see if anybody has another question, just let you guys know we did record this tonight. We're going to post it on our Center Alumni YouTube channel, and then share the link in both our social media channels as well as the Next Family newsletter for folks who either want to go back through and catch significant parts of it again, or if you've got family members or friends you think might find it useful, it'll be available there as well. Anything else that Chad or Kevin that you guys want to add?
I simply want to say thank you for the time tonight, everyone. And if ever we can be of help here at Center College, please let us know. We're here to help always. Be in touch, telephone calls, emails, any way in which you'd like to make contact with us, you are welcome to do it. So thank you all so much. Best wishes as you navigate what lies ahead, and happy Thanksgiving, which is in just 9 days. And thank you, Krista, for helping coordinate everything.
Of course. And yes, and if you guys, Chad and Kevin's information, we'll post it in the newsletter as well. So you guys can reach out to them, but you can always reach out to me or anybody here at the Alumni House as well. And we'll help get you in touch with the correct folks across campus. But happy beginning of the crazy holidays, and we'll see you guys soon. Thank you all. Thank you, Chad and Kevin. Thanks.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.